Hello, friends, and welcome back to Market Shares. I'm your host, Tony Blodgett, and today I'm really excited about this conversation because this is something that I'm involved in every single day. It's a big part of my career, and so to have a conversation with our guest today on something that I'm so passionate about and so many of the people that I manage and lead are involved in every day, this is going to be not just insightful for me, but hopefully for our listening audience as well. So I'll waste no time in introducing our guest today, which is Richard Milligan. And Richard is with 4C Recruiting. And we're going to talk today about recruiting in general, but really working, how managing recruiters, people who recruit, but also manage those teams, how they can go about having the success that they're looking for in their career. So Richard, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on to Market Shares and have this discussion with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be exciting. We were connected because your coaching firm actually works with some of the people that I employ. And so I was told hey, you got to talk to this guy. He's really sharp. And so I've done my own research and I've been kind of watching some of your stuff on social and YouTube, which is my favorite TV channel is now YouTube. That's where I spend most of my time gathering information, and hopefully a lot of our audience here, I'm sure they watch through YouTube, if not other mediums. But I've seen some interviews with you. I know we have some mutual friends, probably a lot of mutual friends, but we've actually never met. So this will be exciting. Maybe to kick us off, Richard, if you could you give us just a little bit of background on yourself, maybe your elevator pitch, if you will, on kind of your background, and then a little bit about 4C Recruiting and do some justice to my intro on what exactly you focus on helping people do.
Yeah, the best way to probably share it with you, Tony, is just a story framework. When I turned 25 years old, I took my first management position. I started in a leadership role where I had to build and grow teams. And from the age of 25 until I left the mortgage industry in 2017, that 24-year window, I was responsible for leading teams, but then also responsible for recruiting to those teams. And in that entire journey, I never had any type of corporate recruiting support. I was always on the sales side. And so I was always responsible for finding those experienced loan officers in the mortgage industry or experienced branch managers. But when I was in B2B sales, responsible for finding the experienced salesperson and recruiting them to my team. And so over that journey, I learned a lot of lessons. Left the mortgage industry after 15 years, heading into 2017 and started 4C Recruiting. And 4C Recruiting was originally started as a recruiting firm. We went out and signed 11 different agreements with companies to recruit for them. And very early on, I realized that most recruiting leaders did not know how to recruit. And as I began to think about it, it made a lot of sense to me because no one's ever trained the recruiting leader on recruiting. They've all kind of developed their own skill set through reading books, their prior sales experience, and then they happen upon, these frameworks that they recruit through. And I found that most of the recruiting leaders that I was handing recruits to really struggled to take the recruit to the next step. And I began to coach around it and had two CEOs that reached out to me and said, hey, what you're doing in terms of these one-off meetings with our teams and coaching them is working. Would you be willing to create a coaching curriculum for us? I'd never thought about it. And in that moment, I just had this epiphany, if I'm going to do it for somebody else, why wouldn't I do it for me? Why wouldn't I do it for 4C? And so summer of 2017, I took about 4 months and created a 8-week coaching curriculum at the time. And then in October of 2017, just went to LinkedIn and announced it to my audience, hey, I'm going to host a live webinar for 90 minutes, give you my best content. And I had about 100 people attend that webinar. At the end of it, I said, if you found value today, I'd like for you to stay on. I'd like to show you what it could look like to be coached by me. And I had 45 people or so. That number is kind of a round number. I don't remember the exact number, but about 45 people sign up for my coaching. And I just had this moment in time where it's wow, there's such a need for this. And my early coaching clients have now gone on to be a lot of heads of sales, number 2 people, fastest growing teams inside the companies that they're in. And so our journey over the last now 7 years has been to coach, consult, train in the area of recruiting, but specifically for what I have coined the recruiting leader position. That's somebody who actually manages the team, but is also responsible for recruiting to that team. And there's just zero recruiting training, real recruiting training around that, because that's so unique. It's the leader who is actually the product that's selling themselves, not selling the company. I mean, the leader has always been the product in that position. Most leaders don't realize it, and they point to the awesome company that they're selling. And in my own journey, my own experiences, I learned that when I figured out how to quantify who I was as a leader, it accelerated people to my team. And so that 4C recruiting, that's what we do. We consult and we coach the recruiting leader, primarily about 80% in the real estate and mortgage space.
Okay. So I love that. Let me ask you this. What do you think it is about leaders in, let's just talk about the mortgage space, and I guess real estate being so similar, but what do you think it is about people who become, and in most cases, they're top producers that become leaders, branch managers, regional leaders? What do you think it is about that journey that they've gone through to get into a leadership position that doesn't equip them with the tools that they need to also be really proficient at the recruiting aspect of the role?
Well, when you think about recruiting, too many times we treat recruiting like it's a widget sale when it's more like a $50 million software sale. And, widget sales, you have one conversation, you move someone into the actual close. And we treat it too much like it's a transaction like that versus, when I was in early business to business, I did large selling of large Fortune 500 organizations. And it takes a lot of relationship building. It takes more time and effort. You understand it's a longer sales process, a longer sales cycle, not always, but most times. And so because that's your understanding going into it, you build a better sales framework, a better sales funnel around it. And too many people have looked at recruiting highly experienced loan officers or highly experienced real estate agents like it's very transactional. I can have one conversation with you and my pitch can be, are you open to a better opportunity? When it really should be an offering into an opportunity to build a relationship with someone. I always think like that person that says, I'm not interested, I'm happy where I'm at. What is missing from this equation is simply, quote unquote, maybe more is available, right? In a business where most companies are very similar. We use very similar language around our tech stacks, around our sales processes. You start to look at coaching curriculums that are around certain industries that most companies have people in them. Like, it's really hard to differentiate yourself in the world that exists today. There's no unicorn framework that exists, although there is. The unicorn framework is the leader who's of a significant value, right? And so, the person that's taken this journey of being a top salesperson has been very successful in closing transactions. Now it basically transitions into not selling a product, but ultimately selling themselves. And so when you start to think about it, I just happen to have a bottle of water here. Now this is actually infused by some things, so it's got some ingredients on it like sodium, but most leaders are pointing to the label, on the bottle saying this is what I'm selling, when ultimately it's the ingredients that's inside. And they don't know how to frame it. And I think if most people thought about it, they'd be uncomfortable trying to frame that because they would feel like they were beating their chest using the Muhammad Ali line, I'm the greatest there ever was. And that doesn't sit comfortably with a leader who is confident, but at the same time is incredibly humble, right? Because most great leaders are. And so what we do here is we teach people to have the epiphany that I had, which was back in 2013 in the mortgage industry, the company that I was with, in response to some new CFPB guidelines around compensation, changed the producing leader compensation structure. And in about a 2-week window, I was notified I was going to lose about $600,000 in income. And in my own journey, I had to make this decision. Do I hang on to my production and give up leading? Or do I go all in on leading and building teams? And when I made the decision to go all in on leading and building teams, I reframed the way that I recruited. I had never really thought about it because I was just using the tools that were in the toolbox that I had built as a salesperson, which was call people and ask them if they were open to a better opportunity. And the moment you reach out to someone and ask them if they're open to a better opportunity, they expect that next presentation to be, my company's awesome. And I began to reframe what was typically a recruiting process to a relationship building process. And when you do that, it begins to open the door to most people that would say, I'm happy where I'm at, right? Because now I can have that conversation with you. The key thing is that in the steps that I take now, I have to reveal to you that more is available. And that more is available is always the leader, right? And there at times leaders do offer more. They are more valuable. They've taken the journey of becoming more valuable through coaching, through selling, understanding their sales processes, building great systems, all these things, right? Serving their people. And there are times where the leader actually has to now take the journey of becoming more because they don't offer
Right.
more, right? And so I think it's just that they've been so highly involved in the transactional component of the business, they carry it all the way across to recruiting. And that part actually is a pivot, it's a change for them, and they don't understand that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me that, you know, I would like to think that in the mortgage space, we're not always thinking transactional, right? We want long-term relationships with our clients for life. But let's be honest, I mean, we do jump from one transaction to another. And although the sales cycle has expanded a little bit, given the current market conditions, it's still much shorter than what it would be with, you know, recruiting and actually bringing someone into your branch or your region. So I think that's a really good point. But you brought up a couple things that I want to dig a little bit deeper into. The first one is this idea of a producing leader who's also a recruiter versus non-producing. So you were, it sounds like, in a spot, and I remember these days when the compensation rules changed and how many managers were getting compensated was deemed to be non-compliant if you were also an originator. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. But to me, it begs the bigger question of, you know, can a producing manager also be an effective leader and recruiter? Or do you think there's something to be said for having recruiting managers that focus on team development and growth of the individuals and recruiting versus their own personal production? Or have you seen that successfully balanced?
It's complicated, right? Because if you're producing, and what I've found is that, like, if you're producing, there's about 5 roles that you're responsible for. Now, inside those roles are micro roles. If I sat down and said, here's all the things you're responsible for, there's ultimately about 15 to 17 things that a producing leader carries on their plate, right? And so when you hand them that recruiting leader hat, they're asked to wear that hat at certain times, you know, during the day or during the week or a month. What happens is that it doesn't ever seem like it's that important because everything else, right? If that deal goes south and they now have a fire to put out there, it's the most important thing. If a person on their team has an issue, it's now the most important thing. If the organization changes policy and procedure and you've got to adapt to that, announce that, or whatever it is, responding to that, it's the most important thing. And so the challenge in this is that recruiting leader has a very difficult role, especially when you say, now we want you to do something that a lot of people would consider a singular role. I mean, you have recruiters, right?
Right. Right.
The recruiting leader has these 17 hats they're wearing. Now the recruiting leader hat is sitting over here and it's optional. I can wear it or not wear it. So the number one question I get from CEOs in the mortgage industry, if they don't know about me and I meet them for the first time, is this question: how do you get your producing branch managers to actually recruit? Okay. And then I always respond to that question with the question, which is, have you set expectations for your producing branch managers that they should recruit? Because if it's not a clear expectation, what you have is an expectation gap, right? You want them to recruit. You understand that you primarily could grow around them because they're representing you in the marketplace, but you never set the expectation with them. So where there's an expectation gap, what it can lead to is toxicity in relationships, right? Expectations without agreements always lead to toxicity, right? I expected you to do X, but I didn't communicate X. I expected you to do X, but you didn't communicate that to me, or we didn't agree upon that. So where you always start is really with that, is like setting clear expectations. Here's a great clear expectation, right? If there's 5 primary roles you're responsible for, your production, pipeline management, organizational leadership, recruiting to the team, and then retaining the current team. Okay, I found that if we took your a number of hours and allocated, they typically fall in those 5 buckets, right? Okay, then we have to come to some sort of agreement around recruiting. If it's one of those 5 hats I'm going to ask you to wear. We've done about 1,300 plus surveys of branch managers, and what we've found is that the consensus is that there's about 50 hours a week they all say they work. We work about 50 hours a week in that role, okay? So if you start to look at that and you ask that person, could you recruit for 30 minutes a day? Most people would say, sure, I can carve out 30 minutes a day for anything, right? what we know is that we always protect what's a priority, right? Break into somebody's house and find out, right? Like you always do what's a priority, right? And so we have to prioritize recruiting, and 30 minutes is 5% of that role. 30 minutes, 5 times a week is 2.5 hours a week. 2.5 hours is 5% of 50 hours, right? Is it fair if I communicate this to you and I gain agreement on it? Is it fair that I would communicate to you that only 5% of your role is recruiting? Could you consistently do that over the course of your career? And I have found that branch managers say, of course I could, right? We have to set the expectation for that to begin with. Now we have to come to this 30 minutes and say, is it possible to be a successful recruiter in 30 minutes a day? And it is. I've been able to prove it. Okay, when you think about recruiting is pretty simple. It's basically, if we took all of it and said, what buckets does it fall into? It falls into 3 major buckets. Identifying talent, okay? Identifying the people in your market that fits your avatar, fits your model match, right? Second one is you've got to cross the relationship bridge. So you've got to make initial contact with them. That's the second part. And then once you cross the relationship bridge, if you stay in front of them forever as a person of value, we've kind of framed recruiting very simplistically, right? Now I need to communicate to you a scorecard, some KPIs around that, right? That you and I would regularly visit around. Like, how many people did you identify this last week as talent opportunities in your market? How many people did you cross the relationship bridge? And how many people did you stay in front of forever, bringing them something of value? Okay, so you really have to oversimplify it for that person. Complexity has always been and will always be the enemy of execution. Simplicity always leads to implementation, always leads to execution, right? So we oversimplify it. It's 5% of your role. It's 30 minutes a day. We lay out some key performance indicators that you and I would regularly visit on, right? Like Pearson's law states this. Now, Pearson was a mathematical genius and scientist from the 1800s. And what he proved, just like the law of gravity has been proven, is that where humans are involved, that what is measured is always improved. Now, here's the second part of it. What is measured and reported is always improved exponentially. I want the exponential, right? So many times when you back up as a leader that's leading, producing leaders, what we know is that there aren't any measurements, right? There aren't any clear expectations and oversimplification of it. There aren't any expectations around your roles and responsibilities. And so you just have this big gap that exists that you have to close as a leader. And when you close that, what it leads to is success.
I love that answer. So when you say, let me ask you this. Do you think, and based on that breakdown, it sounds like you do believe this, that 5% of a producing branch manager's time is probably the appropriate amount of time to allocate towards recruiting, given all the other responsibilities that they most likely have on their plate?
Time allocation should always be connected to where you want to go, right? If I want to get in the best shape of my life, then I'm going to have to allocate the appropriate time to getting the best shape of my life. And in seasons, it depends on like where I am, how much I have to allocate to it, like what kind of shape I am in currently, right? What's my weight currently? What's my physical, abilities right now currently? And so where I always start when I'm working with a leader is, where do you want to go, right? Because that will always dictate prioritization of time. The leader who says, I want to be number one in purchase market share. I want to hire 12 loan officers this year. I can see the 10-year vision. I want to have 50 loan officers in this market, all doing 20 million. That's a different vision than the branch manager that says, if I could hire one person per year, that would be success, right? And so we always start with the vision. Where do you want to go? And then you begin to take that end and work your way all the way into the beginning approach. For a lot of branch managers, 30 minutes a day is enough. But there are branch managers, like I go back to me in 2013 and 14, I had a big vision to be in 5 states. And in 4 of those states, we had no presence. And the vision was to be number one in purchase market share in each one of those states. And so it was a massive vision that required way more time allocation. In fact, it required about 60% of my time as a producer. I was doing about 30 million in annual volume. I had my own processor and my own loan officer assistant, my own junior loan officer, but it took about 60% of my time that I had to allocate to get to that. So if I was working 50 hours a week, you start to do the math, like there's 30 hours a week approximately that was being allocated to recruiting. You start to break that into a 5-day work week, that's 6 hours a day that I was investing in recruiting. So we have to connect the dots on that. It's not a template that fits for everybody. Ultimately, you want your leaders to come alive in whatever it is that they're pursuing. So when you think about the word vision, a lot of times we think of it, like almost like a goal, like I want to accomplish X. The purest definition that I use when I'm coaching is that vision is the roadmap to what you want to achieve. So it's the big achievement. It's out in the future. Typically, I will use a 10-year window. So it's big enough that that's a large enough window that we can dream, right? Like 10 years from now, I could go back to college at the age of 50, get my MD, launch my own doctor practice by the age of 60. And if I could do that, anything's possible, right? And so we start with that framework. If anything was possible, where would you go? What would you be excited about? The reason why we do that, Tony, is because I try to oversimplify recruiting a lot for people. Recruiting is simply a transference of passion. It's a transference of energy. And if I'm excited about where I'm going, this awesome, big, hairy, audacious goal in the future, if I can transfer that to you, okay, if I can transfer that energy, that passion around that, I can recruit you, right? So we use vision to insert a lot of energy in what we're doing, into what we're recruiting. That gives it a unicorn framework. When I say number one in purchase market share, if I have a roadmap that I can show to you, that it shows you how we're going to get to number one in purchase market share, I am a leader of interest in this market to you, right? So we start with the vision, okay, and the vision dictates that you must dream. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the word vision, if you go back to the original language that was used in Hebrew, the word vision is the word chazon, chawzon, chazon. That word has a singular definition. It actually means dream. Most leaders are very practical when it comes to establishing goals. They don't think vision. They think, I'd like to hire one person per quarter this year. And that's really a goal. The leader who shows up and says, I want to accomplish this amazing thing in the next 10 years is at a massive advantage, right? Because they can bring a ton of passion, a ton of energy to it. When you think about energy, most of the things that we're excited about, they don't exist today. It's the vacation with the family. It's the Disney trip that we're doing. It's the big thing that we're building as a team. It's this awesome event that we're attending later this year. Okay, most of the energy that you have available around recruiting comes from talking about the future, not talking about today. You have most leaders who say, let me tell you where we are. They don't say, let me tell you where we're going.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, you really struck a chord with me when you said that, recruiting is really a transfer of passion, right? I mean, when you're passionate about what you're doing and you can get other people passionate and excited about the vision you have, I couldn't agree more. I've experienced that multiple times, but then it does make me ask the question. I mean, if you have, and I've certainly had branch managers that have said exactly what you just said. If I could just hire one person per year, I'd be happy, or one person per quarter, or whatever that number is, right? So how do you take that very realistic goal, right? I mean, that's honestly it's realistic. They don't want to bring on too many people too quickly and be overwhelmed and disrupt their other parts of their business. So I think it's a very pragmatic way of looking at it, but it's certainly not exciting. It certainly doesn't incite passion. So how do you bridge that gap? I mean, how do you take these realistic, let's say, goals? Because I don't want to, have a branch manager say that and say, yeah, that's a horrible idea. You need to be in 5 states. You need to be at 20 million. So how do you bridge the gap between a realistic goal, but yet having that passion and excitement?
Yeah. Listen, you don't have to have a world-changing, vision in order to get people energized, right? I think people are actually pretty simple. I think that there can be a lot of energy around the vision. I think that, we need to challenge our leaders to think big, right? In the marketplace, big is different to everybody. Like big, I have someone that said 5 billion in 5 years and is going to actually accomplish that. That had a few people on their team. Okay, that's crazy. That's an outlier vision. Okay, but big is how you define it. Like big could mean that you retain your team of people at 98% over a 10-year window. Big can be that you have a world-class process that retains your client and your realtors at the highest level in any market. The big is how you define it. But big has to have passion and energy associated with it. Because your dream has to be bigger than my dream to inspire me.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's kind of what I was looking for. I thought that might be your answer. But Because I think that if I'm listening to this and I'm like, look, I have very modest goals, where do I find that excitement? But you nailed it. I mean, sometimes it's about quality. Sometimes it's about, longevity. Sometimes it's about, look, we don't want to be the biggest, but we want to be the best, and helping people accomplish their goals. I know some leaders who are really passionate. If I just help one person build a career that they could feel great about, that's going to be very fulfilling to me. So that's my passion. That's what I'm excited about. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is that the recruiting leader is the value, right? And so what if you have a branch manager, a region, whoever, and they don't embody, let's say they're a great producer in their own right, and some of them are a little bit, self-focused because they've only had to take care of themselves, to get to where they're at. But as a result of their personal success, they get elevated into a leadership type of a role. And then the requirement is to grow and scale that branch. Let's use that as an example. And maybe they haven't identified yet, even in their own mind, that I am valuable to other people. They haven't thought about how they're going to communicate that message. And some of them might not actually be valuable in their current state because they are egocentric. They are focused on their own stuff. So they're really probably not as valuable to another loan officer looking to grow their business as they think they might need to be. How do you help people identify that? Or is it possible they are valuable? They just need to uncover it. They need to believe it themselves. Maybe talk me through a little bit about how a leader can establish in themselves what that value is so that they can then convey that to potential recruits in the process of getting to know them.
Well, I can use myself as an example. I started leading at the age of 25. I remember the tension around being 25 and having a team. I inherited a team that on it were 3 people, men and women, that were in their mid-50s. And I remember the tension around them thinking they should have been in the position of leading and they weren't hired for it. I was brought in from another market because I was number 1 in the division in sales for this to be my first leadership opportunity. The amount of value that I could bring to them at the age of 25 versus the amount of value that I can bring at the age of 51 is a significantly different amount of value. But I had enough intuition at the age of 25 to know what value I could bring. And one of the ways that I brought value is that we were in business-to-business sales. I had been highly successful in business-to-business sales. So I made a point to actually go out into the field and sell with my people because that was a way that I could bring them tangible value to the point where people begged me to go with them because we would typically make a month's quota in 1 day with Richard. It's different value then, but it was value. It's different value then than it is today after 25 plus years of leading and all of the coaching and events that I've attended and all the people that I've led and all the failures that I've had that I've learned from. It's a different value stack. And that's the term that I use, is that we all have a stack of value. It's events that you've gone to, it's prior experiences that you've had, it's books that you've read. It's just an aggregate of all your life experiences, right? That you then use as your platform to now direct that value at other people. Now, where you have to start is that, do you have a heart for redirecting that value? Because to some of the stuff that you referenced early on, not everybody has a heart for leading, although a lot of people have like this desire to actually have a title and a framework and recognition, those things that a title and leadership can actually bring to you. I think it's really important for us as companies to make sure that we have people in the right seats on the bus for the right reasons. Someone who's hyper egotistical, it's all about me, that doesn't want to actually take their value stack and transfer that to the people on their team, shouldn't be in a role where they're leading. They're not at some season, maybe they'll get to a place where they want to share that value stack, but not everybody wants to share their value stack. And then there are leaders that are somewhere on that journey where maybe they don't have a very big value stack. They have a heart to lead, but they don't have a very, very big value stack. And the challenge for them is to actually go become more valuable, which is not that hard to do today, Tony. Like when you think about like in 92, like when I graduated high school and I decided that I was going to go to college, like to become more valuable was way more difficult than it is today. Okay. I mean, I go back to like 2017. I didn't know a lot about personal branding. But when I realized how important the personal brand was for the recruiting leaders, I began to see it in the data. I realized I was going to have to coach to it as a coach. I became the expert in like 90 days. Well, how did I do that? I listened to 350 podcasts. I read about 20 books. I attended multiple events. I mean, I basically went and took, a 4-year college curriculum in like 90 days, just all from this thing right here called my smartphone. Right. And so today, leaders that have this aha, which is like, I'm not as valuable as I'd like to be, you just have to make a decision to become dynamic and to stop being static. Static means that you are who you are, you're never going to change. And we have a lot of leaders in an aging workforce, right? Where we're just in this weird place where like next year, they say 70% of the workforce is now going to be millennials. We have a lot of people who are, 50 plus years old that are just dynamic. And you have a lot of people in there that are just also static. They're not growing, they're not learning, they're not evolving. And because the digital world has demanded dynamic leaders, right? Demanded that they're in the right places and that they will drive growth within organizations. What you're going to find is that those static leaders don't have a place inside the unit anymore. So, but if you're the leader that wants to grow, you can grow like that. You can become more valuable like that, right? And so it's really on us as leaders to make that decision. If I don't have the value stack, how will I become more valuable?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that, but you do have to make that decision. You do have to be a dynamic leader, I think, to attract and recruit and grow. And so, if you're at an organization or you're in a role where, and you're right, we don't as an industry do a great job of defining expectations for our recruiting leaders. But let's say that we're in the process of doing that and we identify, look, this is something that's necessary of this role. And we all agree on the amount of time that you're going to commit to doing that. And we go, okay, I can do that. But if it gets down to it and you don't have that value to provide, which I would argue most people do. They just need probably some help defining it, But to your point, you can acquire those skills quite quickly. I couldn't agree more. That's a great answer. And hopefully an inspiration for somebody, because I know there's managers out there that they're not afraid to make the phone calls, except for the fact they don't know what to say about how they're going to help somebody's career. And to your point, they lean on the company. They point out the products, the programs, the pricing, the marketing, all of those things. And everyone has those things. I mean, I would argue some companies have better than others. But at the end of the day, that's not going to move the needle for a top producer who's happy with their current job. They want growth. They want someone to help, inspire and bring them to the next level. And as a recruiting leader, you have to be able to not only identify what those things are and embody those, but then communicate them to somebody as well. But it's totally doable and trainable, to your point.
It's a heart posture to be a life-giving leader. It's a heart posture, right? It's like this can't be about, I want to grow because I'm going to make X amount of money as I grow, right? If it's that, then there is no heart posture for people to actually, to accomplish what they want to accomplish inside your team. If I took this and very simply said, if I said at 25 years of age, if the only value stack that I had was this, is that I wanted to know your dream and why that dream was important to you. And I wanted you to know that my value stack as a leader was to help you. My main goal when I woke up every single day was to simply help you accomplish that dream. That's enough of a value stack. Now you can look to your leaders and just say, hey, if I was to ask you what the 10-year professional dream was and what the 10-year personal dream was for every person on your team, could you answer that? I already know the answer to that, Tony. 100% of the time when I've asked leaders that, is I don't know. I think I know. I think I could articulate it. No, wait a second. Have you ever asked the question, where do you want to go professionally over the next decade? What's the big dream? And why is that dream important to you, right? And if that, at the age of 25, if that was the only thing on my value stack I said was, I want to know my people's dream and why their dream is important to them, and that I'm the leader above all other leaders that's going to focus on that and help you accomplish that, okay, that's enough to attract people. So it can be more complex. You look at a $100 million producer that's growing teams, and I have coached a lot of them, okay, that are now taking that and turning that into internal coaching framework and passing that on to the team. That's an awesome value stack. You can still have a leader that has produced 100 million in volume themselves that doesn't have the heart posture of like, I'm all about helping you accomplish your dream. And there's a more valuable leader out there than them.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I think I have to imagine through this journey of coaching, you've helped people identify that maybe being in a leadership role isn't right for them. Because let's be honest, you mentioned it earlier, it's not for everybody. You do have to lead with your heart. You do have to care about helping other people accomplish their goals. It can't just be about you and the money that you might make as a result of it. So, I think a lot of people aspire to your point of maybe it's the title, it's the money, it's the status, it's the things that come with leadership, but it's not for everybody, and sometimes identifying that and focusing on, your own personal production in many cases is the right answer, nothing wrong with that. Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit. This has been a super insightful conversation, but I want to be mindful of time. And I want to talk a little bit about recruiting leaders that work with recruiters, whether it be outside recruiting firms or internal, company provided recruiting support. And do you have an opinion on how a recruiting leader should best build a relationship with kind of a staff recruiter or a company, recruiter? And then how do you define those different roles? Because they're clearly different. This person is not ultimately going to be the leader of that person once they get on board. So I have to imagine with your framework, it does make it a little bit more difficult for that recruiter if they're not that leader to the person that they're trying to recruit. So can you maybe speak to that a little bit? And how does that fit in with your framework?
With that piece right there, the defining the roles, because that's the understanding your responsibility as it relates to the cycle of recruiting, right? When we talk about recruiting, we typically talk about like early cycle or full cycle, right? Full cycle meaning like from the moment that person shows up on your radar as an opportunity all the way through the end of them crossing that finish line. That's the full cycle of recruitment, right? It's been a mistake for a lot of industries to have what I would call quote unquote full cycle recruiters. Okay. I'm going to offend some people on this, Tony, but let me explain why. If the product that we're selling is our market leader, right? If the product that we're selling is our market leader and you're a full cycle recruiter and you're building the relationship, and we're waiting for someone to raise their hand to say, I'm now interested, and now you're going to introduce them to your product that you're selling, that was a mistake.
Right.
Because if I've got an awesome product that I'm selling, the faster I can get you to see the value of that product, the faster I can get you across that finish line. And so a massive mistake is like a bunch of this industry, we're talking about the mortgage industry, and even real estate as a whole, okay? Full cycle recruitment is typically what they do, okay? You build all these relationships, the recruiter owns that pipe on that process, and when someone finally goes, okay, now I'm ready to have a conversation, we then bring that product in, and that product at times doesn't resonate with that individual, okay? Or that product is awesome, and now we've just delayed this, that we've made this a 3-year cycle when it could have been a 6-month cycle. Right. So what I am a firm believer in, being able to prove this again and again, is in what I would call early cycle recruiters and partnering them with phenomenal leaders. Right. And so when you think about recruiting is a series of sequences, right? We talked about part of that earlier. You identify opportunities, you make first contact. That's not the highest and best use of a producing leader's time. It's not the highest and best use of the time of a leader who's trying to manage a team while recruiting as a team, right? So having somebody that does that then very quickly, right? And this changes your entire sequencing, right? It takes it from being very, what I would call company sale to very relational and relationship building. It changes all your scripting. It changes your first step. It changes the second step. It just changes the language of all around that. You got a recruiter that says, I'd like for you to meet Tony. Okay, Tony's promise is this. If you were to take his call for 15 minutes, his promise was not going to talk about the company, no recruiting allowed. But he does think the market's changing dramatically right now. And if something were to ever change in your career, he wants to be a leader you know and trust, that you'd be willing to pick up the phone and call. Would you take 15 minutes with him? Okay. I've set this up as a relationship building first meeting. I'm changing the entire process, the entire cycle. Okay. This is what I figured out. So I go back to 2013. Okay. I'm now pivoting in my journey to 2014. At the beginning of 2014, I was now a full-on recruiting leader, no production. Okay, I gave up $600,000 in income around my production to do this. I was scared to death. So I was super driven, Tony, to make this happen. And in that 2-week window at the end of 2013, I asked myself the question, okay, of the 45 or so people that I've hired, okay, what has been the sequence or the process that I brought them through? And here's something that jumped out at me. What I noticed is that almost all of them in that first meeting was not me talking about the company, was me actually, it was just relationship building. That was it. It was like building relationship. And that was not intentional, because I had this amazing company presentation. I was going to tell you how awesome the company was, but something happened in these meetings where it's just we connected on a personal level and it just didn't come out. It wasn't like the right time, right? And what I noticed is as I was kind of rebuilding, like, hey, this is what my sequence is going to look like in the new model, I had this epiphany, which is like, I need my first meeting to always be relationship building. And so I asked myself this question, how do I create that? Well, my scripting at the time that I was using was saying, would you be open to talking about a better opportunity, about a better company, okay, about growth in your career or something like that, right? And so they were all coming into this meeting with this expectation that I was going to share that my company's awesome. Now, almost all the people I shared that with did not move forward. And I had perfected this thing. It was professionally done, Tony. All the people that moved forward were relationship building, right? So I said, I need to change my scripting. So some of what I just framed for you, I didn't give all of it here, but I teach the scripting framework, right? Which is that, man, when you lead with affirmation, Tony, I don't know you. The reason why I'm reaching out is that I did some research on you, and I am blown away by some of the things that you're doing that are incredible in your career. And I want to share some of those things with you. I started leading with affirmation, and I started establishing a really big reason why I want to have a conversation with you, because I think the industry is changing dramatically. And I think the pace of change is going to accelerate as we go through the next 2 and 3 years. And so with that said, I want to invite you into a 15-minute meeting. And here's my promise. If you said yes to this meeting, no talking about my company allowed, I simply want to build a relationship with you for the future. Would you be open to that? I realized I had to shape my scripting so that the first meeting was relationship building only. Okay. Now here's what happened. Like 1 out of every 25 people that I talked to would say yes before I changed the scripting. When I changed the scripting, about 1 out of every 2 said yes. And it blew my mind. I mean, in the first 90 days, I set 38, when we called them corporate site visits, set 38 corporate site visits with branch managers that had teams. I'd never had that kind of success before, simply because I took what was typically a very transactional, my company's awesome process, and I changed it into completely relationship building, and now changing the sequencing of how I communicated to you to share with you who I was as a leader, okay? And that's the big aha on this, is that it when you begin to understand, like, you as a leader of the product, it changes the system, the sequencing of how you communicate to people, okay? And what it does is it goes from being what I would call very left brain, very logical, like your company toolbox is very logical, right? Your product offering, your pricing offering, your compensation model, it's very left brain. And I've made it very right brain, which is very emotional, okay? And if you ever want to see someone make fast decisions, better decisions, engage the right brain, engage the emotional part of that human being, right? What's emotional when you're recruiting? My vision, my core values, my greater purpose, why I do this beyond the transactional value. And what we do is we have to teach leaders how to communicate that to people, okay? And so I realized as I was communicating those 3 things to people, that as people would join my team, they would say, let me tell you why I'm here. That was like a big aha. I had a young man that joined. I mean, from the first time I met Rob to the time that Rob joined the team was like 2 weeks. I could hear Rob down the hallway calling those real estate agents and telling them, this is why I'm here. And he was communicating my core value system to his real estate agents.
Right.
And it was a moment where I was like, oh, I had never thought about Richard being the product. I was communicating it to people, but I never thought about it like in that simplistic framework of Richard's the thing that he's selling, right? And when I went all in on that was when I accelerated the growth of anything that, I mean, I hired over 300 loan officers in just over 3 years. It took me 11 years to hire 45, right? And now I've been able to prove this over and over again. Leaders that communicate who they are, have amazing vision, strong core value systems, strong greater purpose, why they're doing what they're doing, that have great value stacks that focus on the right things. My dream, why my dream's important to me. I'm talking about the recruit stream, why that recruit stream is important to them, and pursuing them through the lens of that. You can take someone who says, I'm happy where I'm at, and you can bring them through your recruiting sequencing, and they'll join your team. And when they get to the end, it's not because they were unhappy and completely dissatisfied. In fact, you don't really want the really dissatisfied people on your team. Like when you think about like mindset, the victim and the pessimist, the negative people, that's the lowest mindset that you can have. I want optimists, I want realists, I want warriors. Those are the higher mindset frameworks. And when you show up on the scene as a recruiter or a recruiting leader and you invite those people into a conversation for the first time, they're going to say this: I'm happy where I'm at, I'm not interested. So your presentation has to connect with them and resonate with them. Your process of relationship building will have them saying yes to taking next steps with you.
So when I think about the recruiter, the sourcer, the person sourcing the leads, it sounds like what you're saying is that the product that they're selling is the leader, and they want to get them in touch with that person as soon as possible in the process. And I agree with you about this, many times, and this is where it's tough, right? Because I think some recruiters, not recruiting leaders, people that their main job is sourcing and recruiting new potential candidates for the recruiting leaders, I don't know if it's that they enjoy the process of developing the relationship, maybe that's what it is, or they actually do a pretty darn good job of sharing, of building that relationship and sharing the company's value and how that leader can bring value. But if you've never made that introduction, it sounds, I guess my concern is, and what I think you're saying is that you've either delayed the introduction to the actual product, which is the manager, which may or may not go well once that introduction's made, or you've extended the sales process by not making that introduction sooner. So in either case, it sounds like when they're making their recruiting calls, they're sourcing potential candidates for that recruiting leader, that their goal has to be to make that connection and introduction as soon as possible, and then kind of get out of the way and play more of a, still potentially play a support role depending on what that is, and the follow-up and the documentation gathering and whatever, there's lots of things that may need to be gathered there. But am I understanding kind of your take on that correctly?
I would make all of my recruiters early cycle recruiters, and I would partner them with my dynamic leaders, because that's what you're selling.
Yeah.
Not all leaders are created equal. They're just not. And if I'm a recruiter, I'm looking to create the highest level partnership with the leaders that I'm supporting that are the most dynamic. Okay, because it's my better offerings, right? They're the things that I have to offer. Or you have leaders who are pretty static, right? Static just meaning that they are who they are, they're not growing, they don't have an awesome value stack to offer because they haven't put in the time and energy to be that person. And believe it or not, today, Tony, social plays a big part in static or dynamic. Because the moment someone says, you should talk to Richard, they Google Richard, what shows up, right? So you can have a dynamic leader in a market that's very static in their approach to their presentation of who they are. And it just doesn't, you will not get people into meetings because digital plays such an essential role in this today. So if I've got a real dynamic leader who's also dynamic in their personal brand, the presentation of their brand, if I'm a recruiter, I want to partner with them at the highest level, because I'm going to have a really high success rate in that partnership where I could spin my wheels forever, put awesome opportunities in front of static leaders and they never go anywhere. In fact, it would be confusing to a static leader. They would say, most static leaders would say, I don't understand, recruiter, why you put that person in front of me. They said they were happy with where they were at. It's your job to reveal to them, quote unquote, more is available, right? When you get in front of someone, if you inspire someone enough, they will aspire to your team. If you don't inspire them, they won't aspire to you, right? And that's why the recruiters intuitively know, like, there's certain leaders I need to partner with because I've got to make a living here, right? And so that's an important part of this, is that you want to, as a leader inside an organization, where if you have some control over this, find great recruiters, partner them with your best leaders, right? You'll have absolute proof of concept around that as you start to create structure around it. That's essential.
Well, I think the other thing that you picked up that you said there that I think I heard you talk about this on a video that I watched, is how important it is for the recruiting leader to have a presence on social media, if for nothing else than to, especially if you work with external recruiters or internal sourcer type recruiters, that they have something to point people to as to a way of getting to know you through social before you ever meet. If you don't have that digital footprint anywhere that they can even refer to, or people can find you, you're really hurting your chances of that person being willing to take that meeting, I think is what you're saying. And if I'm the recruiter, why would I want to tee up or try to tee up these relationships that I've started building with you if I don't think you have a high level of being able to convert them or even get the person to take the meeting with you?
You got it. Look,
Yeah.
this was a Flowify survey that came out in 2016. It was 13,000 originators. They were all $20 million producers and up. This is going back now, what is that, 8 years, okay? In that survey, it said approximately 75% of them were actually self-soliciting their next opportunity. Think about that, Tony. 8 years ago, they were self-soliciting. These are the best producers in the industry, are self-soliciting their next opportunity. What does that mean? It means that like we're connected in digital, and that I'm able to see who you are as a leader in the presentation of your content, in the presentation of how you engage, in the presentation of your actual profile, your landing page there. I can see in context who you are as a leader. Okay, and so this is essential. It shows up on all the data. We did a data piece of the company. This was several thousand meetings that they were having about 55% follow rate. Someone would say yes to a meeting, then no show that first phone call. Okay, and we started playing around with it, A/B testing it, right? Trying this, trying that, and we took the leader as one of our tests, very static profile and profiles on all their social platforms, and we had them create dynamic content. Okay, and we basically, in a very short window of time, uploaded a lot of content, so no one would really scroll past the content. Like, they could scroll back maybe 10 content pieces and see, but it was dynamic and it represented the leader well. It was the leader's voice, okay? And so we redid their landing pages, optimized their landing pages, their LinkedIn homepage, their Facebook homepage, their Instagram homepage, and then we created content for them that represented them as a very dynamic, valuable leader. Okay, and we simply did this. When someone said yes to a meeting, okay, it was like, hey, Richard's looking forward to meeting with you Thursday at 10 a.m. P.S. Richard's active on LinkedIn. You can check out his LinkedIn profile here. Simply added a P.S. line of some of our A/B testing. Okay, what we found is that because that presentation of that leader was very dynamic, somewhere around 25 to 30% of those people showed up to the meeting that would not show up otherwise. Mm. So when you think about this, that is one facet, one little tiny, it's a reminder message that you're going to meet with Richard, right? And as you start to think about the influence, the impact this has on the larger recruiting cycle, okay, it is the most significant thing today. Because if I connect with you, right, and I'm creating content, and that content is really showcasing who I am as a leader, every single time I show up your newsfeed, I'm not showing up trying to convince you to join my company, asking you for a meeting, but I am impressing you at a place where as things begin to evolve and change, you're more likely to take my phone call, you're more likely to engage and respond with me on the platform, and you're more likely to move forward to next steps. I mean, I was working with a leader that came in on one of our coaching sessions and said, I've been trying to sign this mega producer in my market forever. We've made them 3 offers. Their offers expired every 30 days. They would never sign the offer and agree to join, although they would say, like, so I'd love to see your offer. I'd love to see your offer. Got a text message on like a Monday morning. And the text message was like this: I saw your post today. That has convinced me that you're the right leader for me. I'm in. I'm signing the offer letter now. Okay. Well, I think it was us recruiting leaders that probably created the word ghosting. Okay, you get to a place where you create so much tension, people move away from you, right? Well, when you show up as a leader of value and social, I'm not creating any tension for you. I'm not saying join my team. What about now? What about now? What about now? The influence that has is underestimated. It's a massive advantage for leaders that take it serious. I've got a leader, that is in my coaching that is creating companies in years. Okay. If I mention his name here, you would know he is because he's probably the number one influencer in social media today, as it relates to the entire industry, okay? And he would tell you, like if you asked him, I've asked him this multiple times. I wrote a book called How to Dominate Recruiting in a Digital World. He's actually in that book. And I said, what's the number one advice that you'd give to someone? And he said, have a personal brand that's you, not the company, because you will organically source people to your organization when you do that. And he would tell you, most of the opportunities I'm closing are people coming to me in my inbox saying, can we have a conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, man, that's huge. Gosh, Richard, I could sit here and talk to you all day because I'm so passionate about this topic. Unfortunately, here's what I found is that, we get a podcast over about 45 minutes. We start losing our audience, and I think we're already over that. But man, I would love to chat with you, with you more, either outside the podcast or do another episode, because I know there's also some questions I had written down on my note card that we didn't get to. And this is just fascinating because I think for so many people, it's such an important aspect. And, if you think about growing your production, recruiting people to your team is one of the most important things that you can do in order to move the needle as it relates to growing market share, growing production for a branch, etc. So it's so important to so many people. And I hope that everyone that tuned into this episode really listened, because Richard, you shared a lot of really insightful information in this conversation. I'll definitely be sharing this with the people that I know that, are recruiting leaders within our organization. And I hope others, do the same thing as well, because there's a lot to learn here, and so much more. I could tell you were given a lot, but you were holding some back. So I look forward to an offline conversation. We could talk more about what else you have, behind the scenes that we might be able to partner together and work on. But until we have a chance to chat again, I want to thank you for taking the time and just really being open with our audience about sharing your perspective and expertise around recruiting, because so many people would guard this information a lot closer, and you've been very open, and I appreciate the way in which you handled this conversation and what you shared with the audience.
Yeah, well, it's always an honor. I'm super passionate about the recruiting leader position and bringing value to them. And so I'm honored to have just played some small part in your podcast, Tony.
Well, if someone did get a ton of value out of this and they want to engage you individually, is that something that are you taking on leaders that want to grow and maybe through coaching, or do you have other programs that they could check out? What would be the best way for them to learn more about that?
Yeah, I've got a podcast. Recruiting Conversations is the podcast. We're on episode 116. There's a ton of valuable information there. Wrote a book, How to Dominate Recruiting in a Digital World. That's a great place to go. But if you're a leader that's serious about growing teams and becoming the best recruiting leader, you can always book a meeting with me through my live calendar, which is just book Richard Now. Those 3 words, bookrichardnow.com. It'll show you what time slots I have available, and would love to have a conversation with someone that is in that place.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to start following your podcast. I think I did watch a couple episodes in anticipation of this conversation, but I'm going to be a subscriber. For those of you watching this, I hope you got great content out of today, and I hope that you choose to subscribe to Market Shares, because we love having these interviews. We also do market updates. We do a smorgasbord of things here on Market Shares that I think bring values to the mortgage and real estate community. This was a deep one. This was complex. If you're not into recruiting, probably didn't love this episode. But if you do, I think you would have got a ton of value. So please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. We do put out an episode every single Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific. So keep an eye out for those. And more than anything, let people know about the podcast. If there's people that are in your branch, leadership within your company that you think would get value from Market Shares, please share it. I would appreciate that a lot. Richard, thank you for your time. I'll be reaching out to you separate. And to our audience, we'll see you next time. Take care.